Well, joining me right now is the radio host of Let My People Think. That's broadcast on 550 stations around the country. He's also a well-known Christian apologist. He's the author of many books, including this, his latest, Cries of the Heart. And it's a pleasure to welcome to the 700 Club, Ravi Zacharias. Welcome.
Nice to
have you here.
Thank you.
Boy, I guess this is the perfect thing to talk about following Kathy Aon's story. How would you define, Ravi, what the cry of a heart is?
Well, you know, Terry, I've traveled the globe for about 25 years now as a Christian philosopher primarily. And every country I have been to, fascinatingly, while the surroundings change, the language changes, the economy changes, the cries of the heart are the same. Loneliness is endemic in Bombay, as it is in Boston. Struggle for guilt we deal with in Washington, as we deal with in New Delhi or in Jerusalem. And the story that you just told of Kathy's, you know, the irrepressible cry. It may be the cry of pain, the cry of alienation, and this book deals with 6 different cries of the human heart.
I want to talk about what they are in just a moment, but you know, Ravi, it seems that we all have circumstances like Kathy did. Her whole thing began to be kicked off by the divorce of her parents, but the heart cry is universal. What is it we're looking for that we seem to struggle with so much?
I think there's one clue, Kathy, that I've given in the book. Think about this for a moment. Meaninglessness does not come from being weary of pain. Meaninglessness ultimately comes from being weary of pleasure, which is an indicator then that it is not pleasure or pain that is the problem or the solution, but that we are fashioned and designed for something greater than either of those, and only God is the perpetual novelty. So our cry can be for pleasure, our cry can be in pain, and circumstances change, but the hungers remain.
Yes. Talk about the cries of the heart. You mentioned that there were 6 of them that you wrote about in the book.
Yes, I wrote the most important one, obviously, is the one I face on every campus, the problem of suffering, the problem of pain. If there is an all-loving and an all-powerful God, why is there evil in this world? Job's wife said to Job, why don't you renounce God and die? There is a cry that God seems so far from our feelings. He may be intellectually satisfying, but why do I feel him so distant? There is a cry to find out principles for legitimate pleasure. In this world with so many options, how do we decide between that which is a legitimate and that which is an illicit pleasure?
And still have enjoyment.
Exactly. And you know what? I think the closer you get to pure pleasure, the closer you come within the reach of God.
Yes.
Because good pleasure is His gift to us. So there are 6 cries, and the 7th cry is the cry of God's heart to us, the cry for worship. All of my books hitherto have been on philosophical themes. Can man live without God? Deliver us from evil. And if you remember years ago, there was a song that said, how can it be wrong when it feels so right?
Yes.
I've reversed it. How can things be right when they feel so wrong? And so the 6 human cries, and then the cry of God's heart responding to it, where we find the answer.
You know, Ravi, you also, in the beginning of the book, you talk about your wife coming face to face with a woman who was very bitter and very angry in your neighborhood, I believe it was. And your wife was at a place where she could hear the heart cry of that woman. I guess it was sort of in your face anyway, but nonetheless, it seems to me that one of the problems that we have in the church today is because we are so out of touch with the heart cry of God, focused on our own needs, that we don't hear the cries to people from people around us to whom we're supposed to be light. Now, how do we reverse that?
Well, I think as a Christian apologist, I learned a very difficult lesson. We get so preoccupied with the answers, we do not ever take time to listen to the person behind the question. Behind every question is a questioner, and behind a questioner is a convergence of hates. Of hates, prejudices, and hurts. Let me give you a vivid example of this. I was speaking at a church on the problem of pain, I think it was. As I walked to the end of the church, a woman said, I need to talk to you for a moment. And she said, I have a struggle with this. And I was about to give my answer when on the pew behind her, I saw her baby, who was obviously born with Down syndrome. You had to back off. The problem here was not purely intellectual. There was an angst, there was an anguish. How can this be so concrete in a world where God is supposed to be the closest to you. So that introductory story was when my wife chatted with a woman who didn't even want to listen to answers. She said, just leave me alone. But we had the privilege of praying with her in our home one day.
You also talk about how there have been many cries to God in moments of conflict, particularly with generals that you mentioned down through the ages. And then you talk about Jehoshaphat and how his cry was different. Share that with us.
Jehoshaphat, when he prayed not so much for an answer, but to understand who God was. And there were three aspects to his prayer. In one of the books that I have, one of the answers that I've given there, he first started by saying, are you not the God who is? How would we fill in the blanks? When we say, are you not the God who is? Question mark. How would we finish it? Then he says, did you not rescue me in the past? And then he says, will you not be with me in the future? The are you not, the did you not, and the will you not enables us to answer who God is and fills us with the greatest hunger of the human heart to know him the same yesterday, today, and forever.
You also talk about some principles of the character and nature of God in the book. Share those with us.
Well, we talk about God's sovereignty. Yes. We talk about God's holiness. We talk about God's omniscience, and we talk about God's immutability, his unchangeable nature. But the wonderful thing is, doctrines can only inspire so much. Ultimately, you need a person. And so God didn't reveal himself only in theological terms or philosophical terms. Ultimately, he revealed himself in the very person of his Son. And that's the most beautiful aspect of the book, I think, in which I try to focus on what happened there.
Well, I want to say that if you are trapped in sort of the maze that is the 90s in the world that we live in, and you're looking for a way to draw near to God and to understand the heart and the mind of God, Ravi Zacharias has written a wonderful book called Cries of the Heart, and the subtitle is Bringing God Near When He Feels So Far, and that is so true, I know, for so many people. I think you'll find some answers in this book that will really be a blessing to your heart. Thank you so much for being with us. We have touched the tip of the iceberg here.
Nice
Wish we had an hour to do this. Cries of the Heart. It's in bookstores around the country.